Well, we're now joined by Perrin Beatty, the head of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, who, of course, served many different cabinet portfolios in the Mulroney government. Mr. Beatty, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, today has already been described as an emotional day for people who knew Mr. Mulroney. I'm wondering how you are feeling right now to be a part of the state funeral.
It's very poignant. It's a gathering that clans in many ways. You're seeing many people whom you haven't seen for many years. And increasingly it's at events like this, it's at funerals as opposed to the other celebrations that we used to have. And it brings back an enormous number of memories and a sense of privilege that I think that all of us had to be associated with Brian Mulroney.
Can you talk to us about your own sense of privilege? As I said, you served many roles in his government, Minister of Health, Solicitor General, National Defense. But beyond that, you were around the cabinet table, you were at the dinner table, you traveled with the former Prime Minister. When you talk about how poignant today is going to be, on a personal scale, what does that mean?
Well, it was, when I heard the news that Brian had died, I of course knew that he was not well. Everybody knew that. But it was still a shock. When there's somebody who's such a commanding figure, who has played such a role in our national life, you tend to assume that they'll go on forever against all evidence to the contrary. So it was not a surprise, but it was a shock still. And I think for many people who were associated with him during that time, he left such a personal impression on all of us, and he was such an inspirational figure that there's a real feeling of loss, but also a sense of privilege to have been associated with him.
You know, you and I spoke the day after the news of his death was shared. Since then, we have seen so many tributes. We have seen the many Canadians from different walks of life line up in the cold in Ottawa, here in Montreal, to pay their final respects. As someone who knew Mr. Mulroney, who was his friend, what did it mean to you to see so many Canadians come out and say thank you and acknowledge all that he did for this country?
Well, I think the important thing, this was the verdict of history. At the time, often the measures which he was championing were controversial. He did them because he thought they were right for Canada. He said, we won't worry about the short-term popularity. We'll look at it in terms of how history will see it many years from now. And what you're seeing in the outpouring of affection from ordinary Canadians across the country is that recognition that what he did was right for Canada and that Canada was better as a consequence.
Beyond the Canadians from all walks of life, as each one lined up to pay their respects, of course we saw the Mulroney family, we saw Mila, we saw her children, and they stood for hours across many days to receive all these. And I was wondering what you were thinking when you saw them standing there receiving all these Canadians.
My wife and I were watching on TV. We were down in Florida at the time, but watching on TV. And both of us looked at each other and said, it's extraordinary, the strength and the courage and the dedication and the dignity that the Mulroney family was showing. And it says something about that family's commitment to the people as well. They wanted to be there to be able to acknowledge the people who were coming in and to say that they appreciated their being there. And that's extraordinary, and it's something of which the former Prime Minister would have been very, very proud. He loved his family. One of the things, you know, as a member of caucus is he often talked to us about never forget your family. They're the ones who make all of the sacrifices so it's possible for us to be in government. And the affection he had for Mila and for his kids was just enormous.
Yeah, I think that was very obvious in his time during office and then afterwards. We're at this point where we are certainly reflecting on the legacy of Mr. Mulroney. How do you want Canadians to remember him? What lesson do you want current politicians and future politicians to take from his time?
First, he was transformational. He left an impact on the country, made it better by virtue of the fact that he was there. So very often politicians want to hold office for the sake of having office itself. Brian Mulroney wanted to have the office because of the things he could do with the office and do for Canadians to make the place better. Second, he believed in big ideas. There was nothing small in terms of what he wanted to do, and whether it was free trade or the GST or Meach or a whole range of other initiatives, these were changes which really changed the course of the country itself and were transformational. Third, it was his humanity. I have never seen anybody who was a better manager of people than Brian Mulroney was. I've never seen somebody quite like him who did so much outreach, even after he was out of office. And nobody was aware of the number of calls that he made, the number of visits that he made, just the number of times that he extended a hand in friendship to people when they needed it the most. And I've never in my life seen anybody else who is like that. And then finally, his innate decency. I remember, for example, the debate that we had over the issue of gay rights, very divisive during that period and very divisive in our caucus. And I remember him just quietly saying in caucus one day, I can't bring myself to hate somebody on the basis of who they love. And that essential decency really spoke volumes about the man. This was not something for publication. This was from the heart. I saw it as well when he hosted President Reagan and members of his cabinet at 24 Sussex. And he spoke about South Africa to Ronald Reagan. And he spoke only as a friend could. He was very direct, and he said, Ron, these people who are in there today are Nazis. They're on their way out. The United States has to be on the right side of history. This was the ending apartheid in South Africa was something he was deeply, passionately, personally committed to, and he made a fundamental difference for the lives of millions of people. So in all of these ways, he was an extraordinary Canadian who made our country better by virtue of the fact that he was here.
Mr. Beatty, I know you've traveled from Florida to be a part of today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
I just wouldn't have missed it.